Ever feel like you're just drowning in headlines? Information coming at you from, well, everywhere. You just wish someone could cut through it and tell you what's actually going on.
Yeah, what's the real substance, right? That's exactly what we try to do here with the deep dive. We wade through it all so you don't have to.
We filter out the noise, try to find the core insights. And today, we're diving into a batch of recent news segments. You know, the kind that really stir up debate about politics, politicians, institutions.
And the sources for this dive are transcripts, mainly from Fox News and News Nation YouTube channels. So it's a specific slice covering quite a range of these recent political topics.
Our goal really is just to unpack some of the key narratives and claims being put forward in these clips. We want to help you get a handle on what each issue is about, maybe see some connections you hadn't noticed before.
Yeah, hopefully leave you feeling a bit clearer on it all. So where should we start? Maybe Capitol Hill.
Sounds good. Let's start there. There was some interesting activity, specifically congressional hearings, where former Trump administration officials were, well, facing some pretty tough questions from Democrats.
Right, it definitely highlights the ongoing tension, doesn't it? That back and forth.
So one clip featured the HHS Secretary Health and Human Services being questioned by RFK Jr. about this generally recognized safe loophole for food companies.
And the big point raised there was connecting that loophole to, well, the claim was about the sickest children in the world, and food dyes. RFK Jr. really pressed him on, I think it was 20 years of work supposedly done on this.
Yeah, it makes you think about how long these regulatory things can take. Then there was another exchange, this one with the Transportation Secretary.
Elaine Chao, likely, or someone similar in that role?
Right, and a Congress member, seemed like Norma Torres was implied, was really digging into deferred resignations for air traffic controllers. The number mentioned was at least 400.
Which, immediately brings up concerns about air travel, upgrades, system efficiency. And they even disagreed on the wording, whether they were fired or let go.
That difference in phrasing says a lot, doesn't it? And the last hearing clip involved the DHS Secretary Homeland Security. Kristi Noem's name was mentioned in connection with that role.
And the Congress member using that Air Fang Fang Swell nickname.
Yeah, and the topic was incredibly sensitive. The deportation of a 4-year-old American citizen who apparently had stage 4 cancer.
And the real crux there was the conflicting stories about what the mother wanted and the details of the medical care provided. It just really hits home the human impact of these policies.
We also heard reaction from Congressman Byron Donalds from Florida. He described the Democratic mood up there as full desperation.
That's strong language. It points to his view of the political climate, that one side feels cornered.
He basically accused them of lacking leadership, holding these lash-out factor hearings, he called them, on things that he felt don't actually matter. He used that Abrego Garcia deportation case as an example of getting caught in the weeds.
Which is a common tactic, right? Focusing on a specific, often emotional case to criticize broader policy.
And speaking of Abrego Garcia, there was this whole thing about a photo of his hands, a claim it was doctored.
But the response was that the caption explained the tattoo MS for Mara Salvatrucha. It shows how visual stuff can get twisted,
Definitely. Congressman Donalds then argued that deporting criminal illegal aliens, as he put it, destroys the narrative of the Democrat Party about borders being unsecured.
So framing it as directly challenging the other side's position on immigration, it really lays bare the deep disagreements there.
He wrapped up pretty confidently, saying Republicans have the solution for the future, and that Trump's officials were winning the war in these hearings.
A very assertive take, clearly projecting strength and claiming victory in those specific confrontations. It sets a narrative.
Okay, shifting gears now. Let's move from Congress to the media itself. This is always a lively area.
It certainly is. We looked at a Fox News segment where Ben Shapiro and Benny Johnson, both conservative commentators, were making some pretty big accusations against the New York Times and also the group Media Matters.
What was the core accusation?
They claim the Times is essentially working with Media Matters, which is, a left-leaning group, specifically to silence them.
How so? What was the evidence presented?
Well, they said a New York Times reporter reached out about a potential hit piece. Their words focused on their coverage of Vice President Harris, and they believe this outreach was coordinated with Media Matters.
That raises questions about independence, doesn't it?
Exactly. And Joe Concha, on the same segment, had some very harsh words for Media Matters. He called them corrupt. a dishonest activist organization
Right.
whose mission, he claimed, is to squash any free speech from conservatives. He even mentioned Elon Musk calling them evil propaganda.
So very strong feelings there. Why did Shapiro and Johnson think they were being targeted?
They suggested it might be because of their opinions on things like COVID's origins, the Hunter Biden laptop story, and claims about election interference involving VP Harris's nomination.
Right. Topics that have definitely been controversial.
Though the counterargument made was that, well, lots of people hold those opinions. Are they really grounds for being silenced?
The discussion also touched on Media Matters' tax-free status and their known tactic of pressuring advertisers to pull funding from outlets they target.
Yeah, and the concern voiced was that the New York Times was treating them as a legitimate source, despite these practices and criticisms.
It sort of gets into that whole debate about who counts as a credible source and the lines between journalism and activism.
Precisely, and they brought up the Hunter Biden laptop situation again as a sort of precedent, an example of when they felt certain voices or stories were squashed.
So the overall theme here is this ongoing battle over narrative control in the media, with accusations of bias and even collusion flying back and forth.
Definitely. Okay, shall we move to the courts? There's a potentially big case brewing at the Supreme Court.
Yes, let's do that. This involves the power of federal judges.
We looked at a segment from official ACLJ discussing Supreme Court oral arguments about whether district court judges, that's the first level of federal courts, should be able to issue nationwide injunctions.
So stopping a government policy across the entire country, right? Not just in their specific district?
Exactly. The case itself actually started with a birthright citizenship issue under Trump, but the Supreme Court hearing wasn't really about that specific policy. It was about the tool itself, the universal injunction.
Okay, got it. So the principle, not just the instance.
Right. And they threw out a statistic. Apparently, something like 67% of these nationwide injunctions have been issued against Trump administration policies.
That's a striking number, though, as you said, the legal question applies no matter who's in office.
Correct. Justice Alito, during the arguments, apparently raised concerns about the practical problem of having around 680 district judges. He noted they're dedicated, but, anyone can be wrong.
And the worry is they might think, I'm right, so I can stop this everywhere.
That seemed to be the concern he was voicing, contrasting it with appellate courts where multiple judges review decisions. A single judge wielding nationwide power is different.
He also described the typical path these take, right? The judge issues the injunction, refuses to pause it. The appeals court might also refuse to pause it.
And boom, it lands at the Supreme Court as an emergency request, often bypassing the normal, slower appeals process. It creates disruption.
They even compared it, interestingly, to the idea of local DAs maybe targeting a president. That sense of localized power having national impact.
Yeah, it all comes down to that balance of power, federalism, separation of powers, big constitutional stuff.
And the argument made in the segment was that this shouldn't be seen as partisan. It's about one unelected judge affecting everyone.
A fundamental point about judicial scope, regardless of politics.
Was there any talk about Congress stepping in? Maybe passing a law to limit this?
It was mentioned, yeah, the possibility of Congress legislating on court jurisdiction. But the feeling was that's probably a long way to go, politically difficult to get support for.
Understood. And there was also the perspective that maybe these lower courts issuing these sweeping orders haven't dug into the issues as deeply as the Supreme Court would.
Right, that the High Court is better positioned for these complex national questions. The final point emphasized was the risk of these injunctions being potentially politically charged orders that just stop a president from doing their job, from executing laws.
So a real tension between judicial review and executive power. Okay, let's shift again. This next area has certainly gotten a lot of airtime lately. President Biden's memory.
Yes, this involves the release of audio from Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview with President Biden about those classified documents. We looked at a segment from Luart Sabatino's de Cruce covering this.
Right, the investigation into documents from his VP days found at his home and office.
And the context matters, obviously. Given similar issues faced by former President Trump, it puts a spotlight on it.
The segment played audio clips where Hur asked Biden about where he kept papers, like for the Penn Biden Center or his book.
Yep.
And Biden's answers were, well,
they seemed quite rambling. And he had trouble recalling key dates. Specifically, when his son Beau died, he first said 2017 or 18, then corrected to 2015, but wasn't sure of the month.
And he also got the year Trump was elected wrong, didn't he? Said November 2017.
Yes, instead of 2016. And the commentary around these clips was pretty blunt, describing his memory as shot, him seeming lost and confused. They noted how long it took him to answer.
These specific instances definitely raise questions about recall.
And the point was made that this interview, back in October 2023, was apparently one of the first times an outsider had spent that kind of extended time with him recently.
Interesting. The segment then talked about the reaction when Hur's report came out, calling it a bomb went off, leading to that hastily arranged press conference where Biden defended himself.
Right. It shows how sensitive this is politically. Any question about fitness for office becomes huge news.
They also brought up an anecdote from a debate, Biden apparently saying, "We finally beat Medicare," and then a statement about Border Patrol and asylum officers that was hard to understand.
Yeah, moments like that where communication seems unclear or factually off, they just add fuel to the fire, really.
The argument presented was that releasing the audio, after the transcript was already out, made it clear why the audio might have been held back initially. There were accusations that some media outlets tried to downplay the whole thing.
The handling of the audio versus the transcript definitely sparked debate about transparency and potential spin.
And they discussed the potential real-world implications. If there are memory issues, what does that mean for big decisions? They used a hypothetical.
It's like mixing up Libya and Syria for troop deployment. A stark example of why cognitive function is critical for a president.
Questions were also raised about things like presidential pardons, the use of the autopin for signing documents, and if Biden's cognitive state could lead to legal challenges down the line.
Serious constitutional questions could potentially emerge there.
Then another audio clip played where Hur asked about finding the classified material, and Biden apparently said multiple times he couldn't remember.
That repetition of "I don't remember" on the audio seemed to really reinforce the concerns from the report.
Chris Whipple, who wrote Uncharted, weighed in. He said the audio basically confirmed what the report suggested and what he felt everybody knew, except Joe Biden's inner circle, that Biden wasn't qualified to run again.
That's a heavy assessment from someone who studies presidencies closely.
Whipple even mentioned Ron Klain, Biden's former chief of staff, supposedly describing Biden on the record as being in bad shape during debate prep at Camp David.
Wow. Hearing that from a former top advisor adds another layer, suggesting concerns might have existed internally, too. This whole thing just raises fundamental questions about fitness and transparency.
Definitely. Okay, next up is a slightly bizarre story involving a former FBI director and seashells on social media.
Yes, this was covered on Jesse Watters' Primetime. It's about James Comey being questioned by the Secret Service over a social media post.
What was in the post?
It showed seashells arranged to form the numbers 8647.
Okay, and the significance.
Well, 86 is common slang, often meaning get rid of or take out. And 47 is widely seen as referring to Donald Trump, the potential 47th president. So the interpretation by some was that it was a veiled threat.
Ah, I see. What was Comey's explanation?
He claimed he just thought the shells were a political message and that he didn't actually arrange them. The photographer did, apparently. He just took the picture.
Downplaying the numbers a bit.
It seemed that way. And this was contrasted with Comey's own past criticism of Trump's stand back and stand by comment, suggesting a potential double standard in how he views charged language.
How did the media react to Comey's post?
It was all over the place, apparently. CNN suggested 86 is just bartender slang. MSNBC reportedly defended Comey, surprisingly. Others talked about conservative uproar, and some morning shows like ABC and CBS reportedly didn't cover it at all.
That really shows the media divide, doesn't it? Different outlets, completely different takes, or even silence.
Absolutely. The argument made on the segment was that Comey, former head of the FBI, must have known how 8647 could be interpreted, and that posting it set a dangerous precedent.
The concern being someone in his position shouldn't be putting out messages that could even look like a threat.
Precisely. And the timing was noted, too. He had a book coming out, a novel, apparently, about right-wing extremists planning an attack.
So questions about maybe drumming up publicity.
That was floated as a possibility. It was also reported the Secret Service planned to interview Comey's wife as part of their inquiry.
Suggests they were taking it seriously.
It seems so. Joe Concha, again, had a very strong emotional reaction, condemning Comey, even calling for his arrest, referencing past threats against Trump.
So very intense feelings on that side.
Definitely. And then the segment actually circled back briefly to the Her Report audio, the part about Biden and the boxes in his garage, not knowing what was in them.
Connecting the dots, maybe. Suggesting issues with judgment or awareness across different figures.
That seemed to be the implication, that the questions around Biden's cognition make other incidents, like this Comey post, feel part of a larger pattern of concern about who's minding the store, so to speak.
Okay, for our final section today, we're looking at analysis from a prominent commentator on this whole Biden cognitive issue and the media's role.
Right. This is from News Nation, featuring George Will. He talked about what he called the Sleepygate scandal.
Sleepygate, okay. What was his main point?
He was very blunt. He argued that no one can believe the explanations being given for Biden's sharpness, and he questioned why the charade, as he put it, is being maintained.
So a strong sense of disbelief about the official narrative.
Yes, he drew comparisons to past presidents like Woodrow Wilson after his stroke or FDR's health issues, but noted the difference was maybe less public awareness or scrutiny back then.
His point being, today things are different. The public sees more.
Exactly. And he argued the real scandal isn't just what the Democratic Party might be doing, but what he sees as a media cover-up.
Accusing the media of actively hiding or downplaying the issue.
That was his assertion. He mentioned anonymous sources in books, probably like Whipple's, where insiders allegedly described Biden as completely out of it. He asked why the media isn't chasing those leads more aggressively.
Raising questions about journalistic rigor when it comes to the current president.
That seemed to be his implication. He also told an anecdote about Biden announcing student loan forgiveness unilaterally, then supposedly claiming incorrectly it barely passed Congress, using that as another example of potential unawareness.
Specific examples like that do tend to stick.
And he contrasted all this with clips from MSNBC and CNN, where commentators were describing Biden using terms like intensely probing, detail-oriented, having great mental acuity.
A very stark difference in portrayal.
Absolutely. Will also pointed to a Wall Street Journal report that cited, I think it was 45 sources, raising concerns. And he noted how outlets like Morning Joe reportedly dismissed that report.
So highlighting the selective coverage again.
Yes. And he finished by observing how the narrative shifted so fast from Biden being the sharpest man before a particular debate to calls for him to step down almost immediately after. It shows how quickly perceptions can change based on performance.
It really does. So George Will's take is essentially that there's a significant gap between reality and media portrayal regarding Biden's cognitive state.
That's the core of his argument, yeah. A pretty critical view of both the situation and the media coverage.
All right, one last area to touch on. Shifting back to policy and politics, some potential roadblocks for a big Republican legislative push.
Yeah, this was from Fox Business, discussing challenges facing what was referred to as Trump's big, beautiful bill, likely related to tax cuts or economic policy.
Okay, so what are the hurdles?
Well, even though Republicans want to get to, yes, there are internal disagreements. A big one is the SALT deduction state and local taxes.
Always a tricky one.
Right. Some Republicans, particularly from high-tax states like New York, want a big increase in that deduction cap. But that's expensive, estimated north of $300 billion over 10 years.
And that doesn't sit well with everyone in the party.
No, because others, like Chip Roy was mentioned, are demanding offsetting savings, like putting work requirements on Medicaid recipients. That's also estimated around $300 billion in savings, potentially. So a direct clash there.
We heard from Congressman Andy Biggs, too, right?
Yes, expressing frustration. His point was, why should taxpayers in states like Arizona subsidize what he called Democrat hard left programs in other states through bigger SALT deductions?
So philosophical and regional divides within the party. Any other sticking points mentioned?
A couple. Potential adjustments to SALT later on in 2029, and making sure undocumented immigrants don't receive benefits under the bill. Standard points of negotiation, really.
And this segment also touched on the broader economic picture.
It did. Mention the recent downgrade of the U.S. credit rating by Moody's down to AA1 from AAA, citing government debt and rising interest payments.
Which means it costs more for the government to borrow money.
Exactly. Underscoring the need for some kind of stabilization plan to tackle the deficit.
Okay, and a couple of investigation updates came up too.
Yes. House Oversight Chair James Comer announced an expansion of the probe into President Biden's use of the AutoPen.
The AutoPen. Why?
The suspicion, especially given the cognitive concerns we discussed, is whether its use could constitute fraud. You know, is the president fully aware and consenting when it's used?
Linking the cognitive questions to procedural ones? Makes sense. What else?
The House Judiciary Committee is looking into allegations against Pfizer specifically that they might have deliberately delayed reporting COVID vaccine testing results back in 2020 until after the presidential election.
Wow, that's a serious allegation. Where did that come from?
Apparently from a former Pfizer scientist, now at GSK, who claimed senior R&D people at Pfizer were involved in intentionally slowing things down.
What does Pfizer say?
They strongly deny it, called the theories simply untrue, and said their process was driven purely by science. Both the scientist and Pfizer CEO have been asked to respond to the committee.
Congressman Biggs weighed in on that too, didn't he?
He did. Said if the Pfizer allegations are true, it's amazingly serious and basically amounts to trying to manipulate the election. He pointed out the irony, given accusations often leveled by Democrats.
Yeah, the election integrity theme keeps coming up.
It does. He concluded by emphasizing how crucial trust in elections is for a constitutional republic.
Absolutely. Well, that covers a lot of ground. We've gone from congressional hearings and media spats to the Supreme Court, presidential memory, Comey's post, George Will's analysis, and legislative battles. Quite the deep dive.
It really is a snapshot, isn't it? All these different pieces reflecting the current political tensions, the conflicting narratives, the power struggles.
It definitely leaves you thinking. When you look at all these different claims and counterclaims we've just talked about, what are the underlying dynamics really at play here? And maybe more importantly, how does the way this information gets presented, or sometimes not presented, shape how we all understand what's happening?
That's the question to chew on, isn't it? Thinking about the sources, the potential motivations, the different lenses used by different outlets. It's crucial for making sense of it all.
We really hope this dive has given you some useful context and maybe a bit more clarity. We encourage you, as always, to keep exploring these topics yourself and just keep thinking critically about
Come on, people now, smile on your brother